I chose my children.
In 1995, no one was watching Courtroom 3. There were no cameras mounted above the judge's bench, no viral clips, no captions about mercy, no comments calling a judge the kindest man alive. There was only a tired wooden door, chipped from decades of slammed frustration, and a handwritten docket taped crookedly beside it. Inside that courtroom, on a cold morning that smelled faintly of old paper and burnt coffee, a young man named José Diniz Aveiro waited for his name to be called. José Diniz Aveiro sat in the second row, third seat from the aisle. His jacket was too thin for winter, his shoes worn down at the heels. His hands, rough, scarred, honest hands, rested on his knees, but they wouldn't stop shaking. He wasn't shaking from fear of jail. He was shaking because missing work today meant losing tomorrow. And losing tomorrow meant his children would feel it. José Diniz Aveiro was not a criminal. But in Courtroom 3, that distinction often didn't matter. The bailiff cleared his throat. All rise. Judge Frank Caprio entered without ceremony. No dramatic pause, no sense of power. Just a man in a black robe who looked like he'd already lived 1,000 stories before breakfast. Judge Frank Caprio sat down, adjusted his glasses, and began moving through cases like a man who understood time was precious, especially for people who didn't have much of it. Parking violations, missed citations, fines that looked small on paper and enormous in real life. Then the clerk spoke a name that barely echoed in the room. José Diniz Aveiro. José Diniz Aveiro stood. For a moment he didn't move forward. Not because he was defiant, but because standing felt heavier than it should have. Judge Frank Caprio looked up. "Mr. Aveiro?" he said gently. José Diniz Aveiro nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." His accent was thick, his English careful, every word chosen like it cost something to say. "What brings you here today, Mr. José Diniz Aveiro?" Judge Frank Caprio asked. The charge was simple, a missed fine, a minor citation from weeks earlier. But nothing is minor when you're living paycheck to paycheck. José Diniz Aveiro swallowed. "Your Honor," he said, voice tight, "I did not ignore the court." Judge Frank Caprio leaned forward slightly, not aggressively, curiously. "Then explain to me," Judge Frank Caprio said, "why the court has been waiting for you." The prosecutor cleared his throat, ready to speak. Judge Frank Caprio raised a hand. "Let him talk." That small gesture, almost invisible, was the first twist of the day. José Diniz Aveiro exhaled. "I work 2 jobs," he said. "One in the morning, one at night. If I don't go, I don't get paid. If I don't get paid—" His voice trailed off. Judge Frank Caprio finished the sentence for him. "Your family suffers." José Diniz Aveiro looked up, startled. "Yes," he said quietly. "My children." Judge Frank Caprio paused. He wrote something down. No one could see what. "What are their names?" the judge asked. José Diniz Aveiro hesitated, then answered. "One is little," he said. "Very little. His name is Cristiano." The name meant nothing to anyone in that courtroom. It didn't echo, it didn't sparkle. It didn't hint at stadiums or trophies or history. It was just a father saying his son's name. Judge Frank Caprio nodded slowly. "And how old is Cristiano?" he asked. 10, José Diniz Aveiro replied. 10 years old. Barefoot dreams. A future no courtroom could predict. The prosecutor finally spoke. "Your Honor, the fine is overdue. The court requires—" Judge Frank Caprio raised his hand again. "I know what the court requires," he said calmly. "What I'm trying to understand is what life required of Mr. José Diniz Aveiro that day." The room went still. José Diniz Aveiro felt something unfamiliar in his chest. Not hope, not yet. Just the absence of hostility. Judge Frank Caprio turned back to him. "Mr. José Diniz Aveiro," he said, "why didn't you come sooner?" José Diniz Aveiro hesitated. Then he told the truth. "Because I was afraid," he said. Judge Frank Caprio looked up sharply. "Afraid of what?" "Of losing everything for something small," José Diniz Aveiro replied, "and losing my job for coming here." That answer landed differently. Judge Frank Caprio leaned back. In 1995, judges were not praised for compassion. They were praised for efficiency, for order, for punishment that looked like fairness. But Judge Frank Caprio had learned something early in his career, long before the world cared. Sometimes the law speaks loudly, and justice listens quietly. He looked at Jose Dinis Aveiro again. This court, Judge Frank Caprio said slowly, is not here to crush people who are already carrying heavy lives. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. Judge Frank Caprio glanced at the file, then closed it. And in that moment, Jose Dinis Aveiro realized something profound. This courtroom was different, not because the law was weak, but because the judge was strong enough to be human. Judge Frank Caprio tapped the gavel, not to threaten, but to conclude. Mr. Jose Dinis Aveiro, he said, this court will take your circumstances into account. Jose Dinis Aveiro's breath caught. The case wasn't over, but for the first time since his name was printed on a citation, he felt seen. Outside, the world moved on. No cameras, no headlines, just a father, a judge, and a decision that would echo far beyond 1995. Even if no one realized it yet, poverty never enters a courtroom loudly. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand attention. It slips in quietly, wearing worn shoes, carrying tired eyes, and sitting where no one looks twice. In 1995, poverty sat beside Jose Dinis Aveiro. After Judge Frank Caprio closed the file in Part 1, the courtroom did not erupt with relief. There was no sigh of victory, no celebration. Because Jose Dinis Aveiro knew something the law rarely acknowledged. Mercy delayed is still anxiety. The clerk called the next case. Life moved on. But Judge Frank Caprio did not forget Jose Dinis Aveiro. He studied the file again, this time more carefully. Not the violation itself, but the notes scribbled in margins, late fees, escalating penalties, a system that multiplied punishment faster than income. Judge Frank Caprio had seen this pattern before. A $10 fine becomes 50, 50 becomes 100, 100 becomes a warrant. Not because someone refused to pay, but because they couldn't. Judge Frank Caprio looked up. Mr. Jose Dinis Aveiro, he said, come back to the podium. Jose Dinis Aveiro stood again, heart pounding harder this time. He sensed something shifting. This fine, Judge Frank Caprio said, tapping the paper, was originally small. Yes, Your Honor, Jose Dinis Aveiro replied. And now? The judge asked. Jose Dinis Aveiro hesitated, embarrassed. Now it is more than I make in a week. That sentence landed like a quiet explosion. The prosecutor frowned. The clerk stopped typing. Even the bailiff glanced up. Judge Frank Caprio removed his glasses. Tell me something, he said gently. If you had paid the fine on time, what would you have lost? Jose Dinis Aveiro didn't answer immediately, because the truth sounded dramatic, even to himself. My rent, he said, or food. Judge Frank Caprio nodded slowly. So you chose survival. Jose Dinis Aveiro looked down. I chose my children. Silence filled the room again. This was not in the statute books. This was not something law school prepared anyone for. Judge Frank Caprio leaned back. In this courtroom, he said, we pretend choices are equal. He paused. They are not. The prosecutor finally spoke, uneasy. Your Honor, with respect, the law, Judge Frank Caprio interrupted calmly, was written by people who never had to choose between feeding a child and paying a ticket. That sentence did not raise his voice. It didn't need to. Judge Frank Caprio turned to Jose Dinis Aveiro again. Mr. Jose Dinis Aveiro, tell me about your work. Jose Dinis Aveiro swallowed. I clean in the mornings, he said. And at night, I do what I can. Construction, carrying, anything. How many hours? The judge asked. Sometimes 16. And how many days off? Judge Frank Caprio continued. Jose Dinis Aveiro almost smiled, but it faded quickly. No days off, he said. Days off are expensive. That line cut deeper than any accusation. Judge Frank Caprio glanced at the fine again. This court can demand payment today, he said. And what happens then? Jose Dini Severo answered without hesitation. I fall behind, he said. Then I fall more. And eventually, the judge asked, I fall completely. Judge Frank Caprio exhaled slowly. This was the unseen math of poverty, a calculation no calculator could justify. The prosecutor shifted again. Your Honor, if exceptions are made, this is not an exception, Judge Frank Caprio said firmly. This is judgment. He leaned forward. Judgment, he continued, means understanding the weight of consequences, not just enforcing them. Judge Frank Caprio looked directly at Jose Dini Severo. Your son Cristiano, he said, what does he want to be? Jose Dini Severo hesitated. Then his face softened. He kicks a ball, he said. All day, everywhere. He says one day he will be the best. A few quiet chuckles rippled through the room. Judge Frank Caprio didn't smile. He believes that, he said. And you believe in him. Yes, Jose Dini Severo said quietly. Even when I am tired. Judge Frank Caprio nodded. Then let me tell you something, he said. A system that punishes a man for believing in his child is a system that has forgotten its purpose. He picked up the gavel. The room held its breath. This court, Judge Frank Caprio declared, will not turn poverty into a crime. The prosecutor opened his mouth, then closed it. Judge Frank Caprio tapped the gavel once. Fine reduced, he said. Payment deferred. No warrant. Jose Dini Severo didn't react immediately. It took a moment for the words to reach him. Then his shoulders sagged, not from defeat but release. Thank you, Your Honor, he whispered. Judge Frank Caprio nodded. Go to work, he said. Take care of your children. Jose Dini Severo turned to leave. At the door, Judge Frank Caprio added one last thing. And Mr. Jose Dini Severo? Jose Dini Severo stopped. Don't ever think choosing your family was wrong. Jose Dini Severo nodded, eyes burning. He walked out into a world that still didn't know his name. Still didn't know his son. Still didn't know this judge. But something had changed. Because when the gavel met poverty that day in 1995, it didn't crush it. It listened. Age walks slower than the law. In Courtroom 3, time moved at the speed of paperwork. Names were called, files were opened, decisions were made. But on that morning in 1995, time arrived late, leaning on a cane, breathing through tired lungs, and wearing a coat older than most of the people in the room. The clerk hesitated before reading the next name. There was a pause. Then, Aveiro, Jose Diniz. Jose Diniz Aveiro felt the sound of his name differently this time. He was already standing when Judge Frank Caprio looked up. But Jose Diniz Aveiro wasn't alone. An old man stood beside him, 96 years old, small, fragile. His back bent like a question the world had stopped answering. His hands trembled, not from guilt but from time. But the courtroom shifted. Judge Frank Caprio leaned forward immediately. Sir, he said gently, do you need a seat? The old man looked confused. Jose Diniz Aveiro stepped closer instinctively. This is my father, Jose Diniz Aveiro said quietly. He doesn't hear well. Judge Frank Caprio nodded. Bring a chair, he instructed. No one objected. The bailiff brought a chair. The old man sat, breathing shallowly, eyes wandering across a room that looked nothing like justice to him, just another place where people told him he had done something wrong. Judge Frank Caprio adjusted his glasses. What is the nature of this case? He asked the clerk. The clerk swallowed. Failure to respond to citation, Your Honor. Judge Frank Caprio looked back at the old man. Do you understand why you're here today, sir? He asked softly. The old man blinked. I was told to come, he said. My son said so. Jose Diniz Aveiro clenched his jaw. Judge Frank Caprio turned to him. Mr. Jose Diniz Aveiro, he said, why is your father before this court? Jose Diniz Aveiro hesitated. Because he forgot, he said. The word hung in the air. Forgot. Not ignored. Not refused. Forgot. Judge Frank Caprio leaned back slowly. How old is your father? He asked. 96, Jose Diniz Aveiro replied. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Judge Frank Caprio closed the file. 96 years old, he repeated. He looked at the old man again. Sir, he said kindly. What is your name? The old man squinted, then smiled faintly. I am Aveiro, he said. Jose's father. Judge Frank Caprio nodded. And how long have you been alive, Mr. Aveiro? He asked. The old man chuckled softly. Too long, he said. Laughter flickered but died quickly. Judge Frank Caprio did not smile, because this was not funny. This was dignity on trial. The prosecutor cleared his throat. Your Honor, regardless of age, the citation. Judge Frank Caprio raised a hand. Regardless of age, he repeated slowly, is exactly the problem. He turned to Jose Diniz Aveiro. Tell me, Judge Frank Caprio said, what happened? Jose Diniz Aveiro took a breath. My father lives with us, he said. Some days he remembers everything. Some days he forgets his own age. Judge Frank Caprio nodded. And the citation? He asked. It came, Jose Diniz Aveiro said. He put it somewhere safe. Too safe, the judge said gently. Yes, Jose Diniz Aveiro replied. The old man suddenly spoke again. I did not mean trouble, he said, voice thin. I worked my whole life. Judge Frank Caprio leaned forward immediately. I believe you, he said. Those 3 words landed like mercy itself. Judge Frank Caprio looked at the file one last time. Then he closed it. Let me say something, he said to the room. This man has lived 96 years. He has paid taxes, raised children, buried friends, watched the world change beyond recognition. He paused. And now, Judge Frank Caprio continued, we bring him here because memory betrayed him. The courtroom was silent. No, the judge said firmly. That is not justice. The prosecutor lowered his eyes. Judge Frank Caprio turned to the old man. Sir, he said softly, you are not in trouble. The old man looked confused. I am not? He asked. No, Judge Frank Caprio said. You are done. Jose Diniz Aveiro felt his throat tighten. Judge Frank Caprio tapped the gavel, once. Case dismissed, he said. Not because the law was broken, but because humanity was intact. The old man smiled faintly, not fully understanding, but sensing relief. As Jose Diniz Aveiro helped his father stand, Judge Frank Caprio spoke again. Mr. Jose Diniz Aveiro, he said. Yes, Your Honor, Jose Diniz Aveiro replied. Someday, Judge Frank Caprio said, you will hope the world treats you with the same patience you showed your father today. Jose Diniz Aveiro nodded. He did not know it yet, but this courtroom, this judge, this quiet moment, were shaping something far bigger than a single case. Because when age took the stand that day in 1995, it wasn't judged. It was honored. And somewhere beyond Courtroom 3, the world was getting closer, slowly, unknowingly, to noticing a judge who refused to forget what justice was for. Some people don't walk into court from a home. They walk in from a car. In 1995, before anyone cared about the phrase working homeless, Courtroom 3 saw them every day, men and women who slept sitting up, who brushed their teeth in public restrooms, who folded their lives into back seats before sunrise. On that morning, Jose Diniz Aveiro stood again when his name was called. But this time he didn't stand alone. A man stood beside him, thin, hollow-eyed, smelling faintly of oil and cold metal. His jacket was zipped all the way up, as if it were the only wall he had left. Judge Frank Caprio noticed immediately, not the smell, not the clothes, the exhaustion. Sir, Judge Frank Caprio said gently, come forward. The man hesitated, then stepped beside Jose Diniz Aveiro. This defendant, the clerk read, failed to appear and failed to pay. Multiple notices. Judge Frank Caprio looked down at the file. Then he looked up at the man. "Where do you live?" the judge asked. The man swallowed. "In my car," he said. No drama, no explanation, just a fact. The courtroom shifted again. Judge Frank Caprio leaned forward. "How long?" he asked. 3 months, the man replied. "Maybe more." The prosecutor straightened. "Your Honor, regardless of housing status." Judge Frank Caprio raised a hand. "Let me ask my questions first," he said calmly. He turned back to the man. "Why didn't you respond to the notices?" the judge asked. The man gave a bitter half-smile. "Because they kept sending them to the place I don't live anymore." Silence. Judge Frank Caprio nodded slowly. "And where did the notices end up?" he asked. "Probably in someone else's mailbox," the man said. "Or the trash." Judge Frank Caprio closed his eyes briefly. This was how systems failed, not loudly, but mechanically. Judge Frank Caprio turned to Jose Dini Severo. "Mr. Jose Dini Severo," he said. "You know this man?" Jose Dini Severo nodded. "He works with me sometimes," he said. "When there is work." Judge Frank Caprio looked back at the man. "You're employed?" the judge asked. "Yes," the man said quickly. "When I can be. But when you live in a car, everything costs more." Judge Frank Caprio nodded. "Gas," he said. "Yes." "Showers," the judge continued. "Yes." "Sleep," Judge Frank Caprio said quietly. The man looked down. "Yes." The prosecutor interjected again. "Your Honor, the issue is compliance." "No," Judge Frank Caprio said firmly. "The issue is confusion between poverty and guilt." That sentence settled heavily over the room. Judge Frank Caprio stood slightly. Not fully, but enough to signal importance. "This man did not miss court because he disrespected it," the judge said. "He missed court because he does not have an address." He paused. "And our system still pretends that everyone does." Judge Frank Caprio turned to the man again. "Do you want to pay?" he asked. "Yes," the man said immediately. "I just can't all at once." Judge Frank Caprio nodded. "Do you want stability?" he asked. The man laughed once, sharp, almost painful. "Yes," he said, "very much." Judge Frank Caprio picked up the file. "And what happens," he asked the prosecutor, "if we issue a warrant?" The prosecutor answered automatically. "He goes to jail." "And then?" the judge asked. "He loses what work he has," the prosecutor admitted. "And then?" Judge Frank Caprio pressed. "He stays homeless," the prosecutor said quietly. Judge Frank Caprio nodded. "So let me understand," he said. "We punish him for surviving and call that justice." No one spoke. Judge Frank Caprio looked at Jose Dini Severo again. "You've stood here before," he said. "You understand this." Jose Dini Severo nodded slowly. "Yes," he said. "When life falls apart, it falls fast." Judge Frank Caprio turned back to the man. "This court will not criminalize your address," he said. He raised the gavel. "Payment plan," Judge Frank Caprio ruled. "No warrant, no penalties." The man exhaled sharply, as if he'd been holding his breath for months. Judge Frank Caprio added one more thing. "And listen carefully," he said. "You are not less deserving of dignity because you sleep in a car." The man nodded, eyes wet. As they turned to leave, Judge Frank Caprio spoke again, this time to the room. "Homelessness is not a failure of character," he said. "It is a failure of systems." He tapped the gavel once. Outside the courtroom, Jose Dini Severo walked beside the man. Neither spoke. They didn't need to. Inside Courtroom 3, another quiet line had been crossed. Not toward leniency, but toward truth. Because when survival is punished long enough, compassion becomes rebellion. And Judge Frank Caprio was getting dangerously close to being noticed. Humiliation doesn't arrive with insults. It arrives with silence, with eyes watching, with hands shaking, with coins placed carefully on wood that was never meant to hold them. In 1995, Courtroom 3 had seen anger. It had seen desperation. But what unfolded that afternoon was something colder. Shame. The clerk called the next case. José Diniz Aveiro. Again. José Diniz Aveiro stepped forward slowly. His face was calm, but his jaw was tight. He already knew this moment would hurt. He just didn't know how. Judge Frank Caprio looked up, surprised to see the same name again. Mr. José Diniz Aveiro, he said gently. We just addressed your matter. Yes, Your Honor, José Diniz Aveiro replied. This is another issue. He reached into his pocket, and then, carefully, deliberately, he placed coins on the bench. Pennies, nickels, dimes. They made a soft, metallic sound that echoed louder than it should have. The courtroom froze. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Someone in the back exhaled sharply. A faint chuckle slipped out, quick, cruel, uninvited. José Diniz Aveiro didn't look up. This is what I have today, he said quietly. I didn't want to disrespect the court. Judge Frank Caprio did not speak immediately. He looked at the coins, then at José Diniz Aveiro's hands that worked, that carried, that provided, then at the room, and something in his expression changed. Not anger, not pity, control. The prosecutor cleared his throat. Your Honor, partial payment. Judge Frank Caprio raised a hand. Stop, he said softly. The word wasn't loud, but it was final. Judge Frank Caprio leaned forward. Mr. José Diniz Aveiro, he asked, how long did it take you to collect that? José Diniz Aveiro hesitated. 2 days, he said. Maybe more. And why bring it? The judge asked. José Diniz Aveiro finally looked up. Because I was taught, he said, that paying something is better than paying nothing. The chuckle from earlier died instantly. Judge Frank Caprio picked up one of the pennies between his fingers. He held it up, not as evidence, but as a symbol. This, he said, is not disrespect. He paused. This is effort. Judge Frank Caprio turned to the prosecutor. In this courtroom, he said, we do not shame people for trying. He turned back to the room. And we do not laugh at survival. No one laughed again. Judge Frank Caprio looked at José Diniz Aveiro. Did anyone tell you to bring this? He asked. No, José Diniz Aveiro replied. I thought it was right. Judge Frank Caprio nodded. Sometimes, he said, what feels right is punished by systems that forgot why they exist. He placed the penny back down, carefully. Then he pushed the coins back toward José Diniz Aveiro. Take this, Judge Frank Caprio said. José Diniz Aveiro blinked. Your Honor? This court, the judge continued, will not take your dignity as payment. The room held its breath. I am suspending this fine, Judge Frank Caprio ruled. Not because you can't pay, but because you shouldn't have to bleed for it. The gavel tapped once, not hard, not dramatic, decisive. José Diniz Aveiro stood frozen. Thank you, he whispered. Judge Frank Caprio nodded, but his eyes lingered on the room. This, he said quietly, is how injustice survives. He gestured toward the bench. When people are made to feel small for doing their best. He looked back at José Diniz Aveiro. You didn't come here empty-handed, Judge Frank Caprio said. You came here honest. José Diniz Aveiro gathered the coins slowly, not in shame, but in respect. As he turned to leave, Judge Frank Caprio added one final sentence, low, almost to himself. The law has teeth, he said, but justice must have a heart. No cameras captured that moment. No headlines followed. But something had shifted, because restraint had spoken louder than punishment, and humiliation had been stopped, not by force but by refusal. The courtroom moved on, but for those who witnessed it, something lingered, a quiet understanding. That one day, when the world finally looked inside Courtroom 3, this was the kind of moment it would recognize. Forgetfulness does not announce itself. It doesn't knock. It doesn't explain. It simply removes things, names, dates, promises, one by one, until a person is left defending absences they cannot remember creating. In 1995, Courtroom 3 was not prepared for that kind of silence. The clerk read the next case, slower than usual. Failure to appear, failure to comply, multiple notices. Judge Frank Caprio looked up. Then he saw her. An elderly woman stood at the podium, her purse clutched tightly to her chest as if it were the last proof she existed. Her eyes moved around the room, uncertain, alert, but lost. Behind her stood José Denis Aveiro, not as a defendant this time, as support. Judge Frank Caprio noticed immediately. "Mr. José Denis Aveiro," he said gently, "are you assisting this woman?" José Denis Aveiro nodded. "She is my neighbor," he said. "She asked me to come. She was afraid to come alone." Judge Frank Caprio nodded. "Thank you," he said simply. He turned to the woman. "Ma'am," he said softly, "do you understand why you're here today?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "I was told I missed something," she said, "but I don't remember missing it." Her voice wasn't defensive. It was confused. Judge Frank Caprio leaned forward. "How old are you?" he asked. 78, she replied. Or 79. She looked down, embarrassed. "I forget sometimes." The prosecutor cleared his throat. "Your Honor, the notices were sent. The defendant did not respond." Judge Frank Caprio raised a hand, not abruptly, but decisively. "Not responding," he said, "and not remembering are not the same thing." He turned back to the woman. "Do you live alone?" he asked. "Yes," she said. "My husband passed." "And do you manage your mail yourself?" Judge Frank Caprio continued. She nodded. "I put it on the table." "And then?" he asked. She frowned. "Sometimes it stays there," she said. "Sometimes it disappears." Judge Frank Caprio glanced at José Denis Aveiro. "Do you help her?" the judge asked. "Yes," José Denis Aveiro said. "When I can. She forgets appointments. But she never forgets to be kind." The courtroom was silent again. Judge Frank Caprio leaned back. This was the cruelest collision of all, a system that required perfect memory from a mind quietly failing. "Ma'am," Judge Frank Caprio said gently, "did you mean to disrespect the court?" Her eyes widened. "Oh no," she said quickly. "Never. I would never." Judge Frank Caprio nodded. "I believe you." Those words mattered, because too often belief was the missing piece. The prosecutor shifted. "Your Honor, if we excuse this..." Judge Frank Caprio looked directly at him. "Then we acknowledge reality," he said. He turned to the room. "The law assumes memory is permanent," he said. "Life proves otherwise." He paused. "When memory fades," Judge Frank Caprio continued, "we must decide whether justice fades with it or grows wiser." He turned back to the woman. "Ma'am," he said, "you are not guilty of forgetting." Tears welled in her eyes. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I don't know what I forget anymore." Judge Frank Caprio nodded slowly. "Fear, not defiance, not negligence. Fear." He closed the file. "This court," he said, "will not punish illness." The gavel tapped once. Case dismissed. The woman gasped softly, covering her mouth. "Thank you," she whispered. Judge Frank Caprio nodded. Then he looked at José Denis Aveiro. "Mr. José Denis Aveiro," he said, "thank you for standing with her." José Denis Aveiro nodded. "It is easy to forget people," he said quietly. "Harder to forget kindness." Judge Frank Caprio allowed himself the smallest smile. As the woman turned to leave, Judge Frank Caprio spoke one final sentence, one that did not go into the record. "One day," he said softly, "we will all need someone to remember us when we cannot." No one applauded, no one filmed, but something deepened in that room, because the courtroom had crossed another invisible line, from enforcing rules to protecting humanity. And as José Denis Aveiro walked out beside the woman, he felt it clearly now. The law was bending, not breaking, bending toward compassion, toward dignity, toward a reckoning the world was not yet ready to see, but would soon be unable to ignore. The young always arrive in court looking confused, not because they don't understand rules, but because they don't yet understand consequences. In 1995, Courtroom 3 grew tense when the clerk read the next case. Failure to comply, traffic violation, defendant is 17. A boy stepped forward, 17 years old, shoulders squared too stiffly, eyes moving too fast, trying to appear fearless while drowning in it. Behind him stood his mother, and slightly to the side, familiar now to the courtroom, stood José Diniz Aveiro. Judge Frank Caprio noticed immediately. "Mr. José Diniz Aveiro," he said, "you're here often." José Diniz Aveiro nodded. "I help where I can," he said simply. Judge Frank Caprio looked back at the boy. "Son," he said, "do you know why you're here?" The boy nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." "What happened?" the judge asked. The boy swallowed. "I was driving without a license," he said. "I thought I could make it." Judge Frank Caprio leaned back. "Make what?" he asked. "Make money," the boy replied. "Delivering." The prosecutor interjected. "Your Honor, the defendant knowingly violated the law." Judge Frank Caprio raised a hand. "Knowingly," he repeated. "Let's explore that." He turned back to the boy. "Why were you driving?" the judge asked. The boy hesitated. "My mom works nights," he said. "I pick up my little sister. I help." Judge Frank Caprio glanced at the mother. She nodded, eyes tired, apologetic. Judge Frank Caprio returned his attention to the boy. "And you knew it was illegal," the judge said. "Yes," the boy admitted. "But I thought, just once." Judge Frank Caprio nodded. Just once. That phrase had ended many lives early. The prosecutor stepped forward. "Your Honor, leniency here sends the wrong message." Judge Frank Caprio looked directly at him. "So does crushing a future before it starts," he said. He turned to the boy again. "How old are you?" the judge asked. 17, the boy replied. Judge Frank Caprio nodded slowly. "At 17, he said, "your brain is still under construction." The courtroom stiffened. "Impulse comes faster than judgment," Judge Frank Caprio continued. "That's not excuse, that's science." The prosecutor frowned. Judge Frank Caprio leaned forward. "Let me ask you something," he said to the boy. "Do you want to be here again?" "No, sir," the boy said immediately. "Do you want a record that follows you into every job interview?" the judge asked. The boy shook his head quickly. "No, sir." Judge Frank Caprio paused. This was the edge. One wrong ruling, and the boy becomes what the system expects him to be. Judge Frank Caprio turned to José Diniz Aveiro. "Mr. José Diniz Aveiro," he said, "you've raised children." José Diniz Aveiro nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." "Tell me," the judge asked, "what happens when a child is punished without guidance?" José Diniz Aveiro answered quietly. "They learn fear," he said, "not wisdom." Judge Frank Caprio nodded. He turned back to the boy. "Look at me," he said. The boy did. "This court," Judge Frank Caprio said firmly, "is not here to end your life before it begins." The boy's eyes widened. "I am giving you a warning," the judge continued. "Not because you deserve mercy, but because you deserve direction." The gavel hovered, but did not fall. "You will attend traffic safety classes," Judge Frank Caprio ordered. "You will get properly licensed. And you will never put your family or yourself in this position again." The boy nodded rapidly. "Yes, sir, I swear." Judge Frank Caprio lowered the gavel gently. "Case resolved," he said. "No permanent record." The mother covered her mouth, tears spilling. The boy exhaled sharply, as if he'd been underwater. As they turned to leave, Judge Frank Caprio spoke once more. "One mistake," he said, "should never cost a lifetime." The boy nodded, this time slowly, understanding. José Diniz Aveiro watched them go. He thought of his own son, young, restless, dreaming wildly. And for the first time, a quiet fear crossed his mind. What if the world isn't kind when my child stands here one day? Judge Frank Caprio looked down at his docket again. Another case, another life balanced on paper. The tension in Courtroom 3 had changed, because the stakes were no longer fines or warrants. They were futures. And the world, still unaware, was inching closer to a moment when it would finally see what kind of justice had been happening here all along. Truth doesn't always arrive clean. Sometimes it limps in late, out of breath, ashamed, dragging lies behind it like broken chains. In 1995, Courtroom 3 was already heavy when the clerk read the next case. Failure to appear, failure to pay, false statement previously entered. A ripple moved through the room. Judge Frank Caprio looked up slowly. Then he saw him. José Dini Severo. Again. But this time, something was different. José Dini Severo didn't stand with quiet strength. He didn't meet the judge's eyes right away. His shoulders were tight, defensive, burdened. Judge Frank Caprio felt it instantly. "Mr. José Dini Severo," he said calmly, "you've been here before." "Yes, Your Honor," José Dini Severo replied. "And you've always told the truth," the judge continued. José Dini Severo swallowed. "Yes," he said. The pause after that word was too long. Judge Frank Caprio leaned forward. "This file," he said, tapping it gently, "suggests otherwise." Silence. The courtroom leaned in, not for drama, but for collapse. Judge Frank Caprio spoke carefully. "You claimed you were not present at the time of the citation," he said, "but evidence suggests you were." José Dini Severo closed his eyes briefly. Then he opened them. "I lied," he said. The word fell hard, not shouted, not justified, confessed. A murmur stirred. The prosecutor straightened, sensing advantage. "Your Honor, the defendant knowingly misled the court." Judge Frank Caprio raised a hand. "Let him speak," he said. José Dini Severo took a breath that sounded like pain. "I was afraid," he said. "Not of the fine, of what it would cost my family." Judge Frank Caprio did not interrupt. "I thought if I told the truth," José Dini Severo continued, "I would lose work. If I lost work, I would lose food. If I lost food—" He stopped. Judge Frank Caprio finished the thought quietly. "Your children would pay for your honesty." José Dini Severo nodded. "Yes." The courtroom was still. Judge Frank Caprio leaned back. "Mr. José Dini Severo," he said, "do you understand what lying to the court means?" "Yes," José Dini Severo replied. "It means I disrespected it." Judge Frank Caprio shook his head slowly. "No," he said. "It means you were desperate." The prosecutor frowned. "Your Honor." Judge Frank Caprio looked directly at him. "Do not confuse desperation with malice," he said. He turned back to José Dini Severo. "Why tell the truth now?" the judge asked. José Dini Severo's voice cracked. "Because my son is watching," he said. The words landed heavier than any evidence. "He asked me why rules matter," José Dini Severo continued, "and I could not answer him if I stayed silent." Judge Frank Caprio was very still. "What is your son's name?" he asked. "Cristiano," José Dini Severo said. Again the name meant nothing, but the intention meant everything. Judge Frank Caprio nodded. "Truth," he said, "is not less valuable because it arrives late." He looked at the prosecutor. "If this court punishes honesty more harshly than deceit," Judge Frank Caprio said, "we teach people to stay silent." The prosecutor said nothing. Judge Frank Caprio returned his gaze to José Dini Severo. "You made a mistake," he said. "Not the citation, the lie." José Dini Severo nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." "But you corrected it," the judge continued, "and correction matters." He lifted the gavel, but paused. "Let me say this clearly," Judge Frank Caprio said to the room. "The law demands truth. Justice rewards courage." He tapped the gavel once. "No additional penalty," Judge Frank Caprio ruled. "The court accepts the correction." José Dini Severo's breath caught. "However," the judge added, "remember this." He leaned forward. "Your children will not remember how much money you made. Judge Frank Caprio said. They will remember who you were when it mattered. Jose Diniz Aveiro nodded, eyes burning. Thank you, he whispered. As he turned to leave, Judge Frank Caprio spoke again. Mr. Jose Diniz Aveiro, he said, truth that arrives late still arrives. Jose Diniz Aveiro stopped. Yes, Your Honor. And sometimes, Judge Frank Caprio added, that's how redemption begins. Jose Diniz Aveiro walked out, lighter, not because he had escaped consequence, but because he had faced it honestly. Courtroom 3 exhaled. Something irreversible had happened. Because compassion had not ignored truth, it had made space for it. And now, the final turn was close. Very close. Because the next case would reveal something even more dangerous than lies. Privilege. Privilege never announces itself. It doesn't tremble at the podium. It doesn't apologize for being late. It doesn't fear the consequences of absence. In 1995, Privilege walked into Courtroom 3 wearing confidence and no consequences. The clerk called the case. Failure to appear. Failure to comply. Judge Frank Caprio looked up. A well-dressed man stepped forward. Clean shoes. Relaxed posture. No urgency in his eyes. He looked like someone who had never worried about what one missed day could cost. Judge Frank Caprio noticed immediately. Sir, the judge said, you missed your court date. Yes, Your Honor, the man replied casually. I had work. Judge Frank Caprio paused. So did everyone else who's been standing here today, he said calmly. The man shrugged. My job doesn't allow time off. A familiar sentence. But this time, it sounded different. Judge Frank Caprio leaned forward. What do you do for a living, he asked. I manage accounts, the man replied. Downtown. And you kept your job after missing court? The judge asked. Yes, the man said easily. Of course. Judge Frank Caprio nodded slowly. Then he glanced to the side. There stood Jose Diniz Aveiro, not a defendant now, but a witness to contrast. A man who had stood here shaking, knowing absence meant collapse. Judge Frank Caprio looked back at the defendant. Do you know what happens, the judge asked, when someone like Mr. Jose Diniz Aveiro misses court? The man hesitated. I don't know. I do, Judge Frank Caprio said. He turned to the room. A warrant, he said. Lost work, lost stability. He turned back to the defendant. And what happened to you? He asked. The man shifted slightly. Nothing. That word hit harder than any lie. Nothing. Judge Frank Caprio sat back. This, he said quietly, is how inequality hides. The prosecutor spoke carefully. Your Honor, the law applies equally. Equally written, Judge Frank Caprio corrected. Unequally lived. The courtroom stilled. Judge Frank Caprio looked down at the file. Why didn't you notify the court? He asked the defendant. I assumed it could wait, the man replied. Assumed. Judge Frank Caprio nodded. That assumption, he said, is a luxury. He gestured subtly toward Jose Diniz Aveiro. Some people don't assume, Judge Frank Caprio continued. They calculate. Because one mistake costs everything. Jose Diniz Aveiro felt his chest tighten. Judge Frank Caprio returned his attention to the defendant. You missed court and kept your job, the judge said. Others miss court and lose their lives as they know them. He paused. Tell me why that should be acceptable. The defendant said nothing. Judge Frank Caprio leaned forward, voice firmer now. This court is not blind, he said, and it is not impressed by comfort. The prosecutor hesitated, then spoke. Your Honor, how would you like to proceed? Judge Frank Caprio didn't answer immediately. This was the edge. To rule harshly would appear fair, but reinforce inequality. To rule gently would expose the system. Judge Frank Caprio looked at Jose Diniz Aveiro again. Mr. Jose Diniz Aveiro, he said, how many times did you fear missing court? Jose Diniz Aveiro answered without hesitation. Every time, he said, because fear is expensive. Judge Frank Caprio nodded. He turned back to the defendant. "You will pay the fine," Judge Frank Caprio ruled. "No extensions, no assumptions." The man blinked, surprised. "And," the judge added, "let this be your lesson." He leaned forward. Privilege does not excuse responsibility. The gavel came down, harder than before, not angry, intentional. As the defendant walked away, slightly shaken for the first time, Judge Frank Caprio addressed the room. "The law cannot fix inequality," he said, "but it can refuse to pretend it doesn't exist." Courtroom 3 was silent, because everyone understood what had just happened. The judge had not broken the law, but he had bent it toward truth. And bending truth long enough makes noise. Noise travels. Outside that courtroom, the world was changing, slowly. Soon someone would point a camera. Soon compassion would become visible. And when it did, it would not be a surprise to anyone who had stood here. Because Judge Frank Caprio had been choosing humanity long before the world was ready to applaud it. The gavel fell, not with anger, not with satisfaction, but with the weight of years spent seeing, listening, and choosing mercy. Courtroom 3 had witnessed poverty, age, mistakes, privilege, and desperation. It had seen Jose Diniz Aveiro stand, tremble, and endure. It had seen others, homeless, forgetful, desperate, arrive hoping for judgment, and leave carrying dignity. Judge Frank Caprio leaned back in his chair. His eyes scanned the room. Every person, every file, every story. This was not a courtroom of headlines. It was a courtroom of humanity. And in the middle of it all, Jose Diniz Aveiro felt something he had never felt in court before. Hope. The judge called the final case of the day. Jose Diniz Aveiro stepped forward once again, not out of fear, but because he had come to trust that this courtroom understood more than the law. It understood people. Judge Frank Caprio looked at him. "Mr. Jose Diniz Aveiro," he said softly, "your life has crossed this bench more than once." Jose Diniz Aveiro nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." "Tell me," Judge Frank Caprio said, "what have you learned from these moments?" Jose Diniz Aveiro took a deep breath. "That justice," he said quietly, "is not only about rules, it's about people." The judge smiled faintly. "Exactly," he said, "and people are not perfect. They are not always prepared. They make mistakes, they forget, they struggle, they survive, and they deserve more than cruelty." Around them, the courtroom was silent. Even the bailiffs seemed to lean in. Judge Frank Caprio raised his hand, not to silence, but to emphasize. "This bench," he said, "has a choice in every case. It can crush or it can guide. It can punish or it can teach. And yes, sometimes it can change a life." Jose Diniz Aveiro's eyes burned with quiet tears. "I understand, Your Honor," he said, "and I am grateful." Judge Frank Caprio's gaze lingered on him. "You are not here alone," he said. "You are here as part of a truth everyone must see, that justice without compassion is nothing more than cruelty, disguised as law." The room shifted. Some nodded. Some exhaled. Jose Diniz Aveiro thought of the moments he had stumbled, the pennies, the mistakes, the fear of losing everything, the late confessions, the homeless worker, the terrified teenager, the forgotten elderly woman. Each one had come before this bench, and each one had left, not broken, but recognized. Judge Frank Caprio stood. "This courtroom," he said, "is ordinary, but it is extraordinary in one way. It remembers what the law often forgets. People are not cases, they are lives." He looked at Jose Diniz Aveiro again. "And when a person comes forward, whether old or young, poor or privileged, afraid or bold, this bench will not choose cruelty." The gavel fell one last time, not to punish, not to scare, but to mark humanity's triumph. Outside the courtroom, no cameras captured it, no headlines screamed, but word traveled slowly, through whispers, through witnesses, through grateful lives. And eventually, when the world finally looked in, they saw a man who had spent decades making compassion visible. A judge who refused cruelty when it was easier. A bench that elevated dignity above rules. and the quiet courage of ordinary people like José Diniz Aveiro, whose stories, once small and nearly invisible, became proof that humanity could survive the law and sometimes even thrive. Because in Courtroom 3, in 1995, and in the years after, justice was not just about guilt or innocence. It was about heart. And Judge Frank Caprio had one that refused to break.